everyone. So I have a tutorial for you today. This is going to be about how to coffee and tea stain bone. I'll be going through 3 different methods that you can use for this, and these of course are not the only methods. This is just kind of my ways that I've discovered that work for me. So I hope that you find this useful, and yeah, so on to the tutorial. First of all, you're going to need something to put your coffee or tea in. So I personally like to use mugs, but you can also use things like little bowls. You can also use containers. Just make sure that you're using things that you don't actually use for any food stuff. Also, you'll have to excuse my voice at the moment. I had a cold this week, so I sound a bit funny. My apologies. Anyway, the coffee that I use is just like cheap stuff. As long as it stains it and it does the trick, that's all that matters. It doesn't have to be anything fancy at all. I use just this big jar of Nescafe. And then for tea bags, I'm actually using blueberry tea by Dilma. But something cool that I've discovered is, depending on the flavour of tea, sometimes it can actually make really cool colours on the bone. So blueberry, for example, makes the bones a really pretty kind of greyish, light bluish colour. The only thing is that you have to glaze it after to keep that particular colour. But this is the only tea I have at the moment for staining, so that's why I'm using this tea. With the tea bags, you don't want to make it like you make a normal cup of tea. You actually need to have about 2 or 3 tea bags in, depending on how strong you want the colour. And you got to make it really, really strong. The same goes for the coffee. I really recommend, if you're going to do tea staining, you start with black tea because it's more basic and easier to get the hang of. When you start using kind of different flavoured teas for different colours, you will need to change up the amount of tea bags you use and how long you stain the bone in there for and everything. So start with something more basic than what I'm currently doing. As for the coffee, I usually add, I think, about 3 or 4 rounded teaspoons. You may need more or less, just depending on what your project is and everything, so this is just my preference, and once you get the hang of it, you'll just know what you're doing and you'll have your own preference too. So now I'm just going to fill these up. And you don't necessarily have to fill it right to the top. It's really, again, about your own preference. So first of all, I've just put down some cardboard. It's just kind of some thin stuff. It doesn't really matter what kind it is. Because this is a rather large bone that I'm going to be painting, I won't be doing any dipping as I will with the smaller bones. I'm actually going to be painting the coffee on and just letting it stain that way. So with this method, you just put the paintbrush in the coffee and you just paint it onto the bone. But because it's painted on, sometimes you will have to do multiple layers. Another thing to keep in mind is that all of these methods work best while the coffee and tea is still really hot. So you need to work kind of quickly to get the desired effect that you want, because the colder that your tea or coffee is, the less that it's going to stain and make an impact on the bone. Another thing is that usually boiling water, really hot water on bone, actually damages it, but in this case obviously it needs to be hot to work. But because it's for a really short period of time that the hot water is on the bone, it shouldn't really have too much of an effect. I certainly haven't had any problems with it, so it should be fine. So the brush I'm going to be using is just this, just painting it on. So if you're happy with doing just one layer and you're happy with the light staining that that gives you, then that's really perfect and that'll be fine with just the one. But I like to have kind of a darker stain on my bones, so this will probably end up getting a few layers. Definitely more than one. Also, if you are going to do multiple layers, it's usually best to wait for the first layer to dry and then going in for the next layer. That is, at least if you're painting. If you're dipping it, that's totally different, but I'll show you that later. So I've just done the first layer of coffee on this skull. So while that dries, I'm going to also paint the mandible. So I'm just going to put that aside. So as you can see, I've painted the first layer of coffee onto the skull and the mandible, so now I'm just going to let them dry for a little bit and then I'm going to add the next layer. You don't have to wait for these to dry for ages, you can wait for like half an hour or an hour, just until it looks kind of like this bit here. And then you can go and do the next layer. I've let the pig's skull dry. I actually let it dry overnight just because it was getting late. And this is how it looks now after one layer of coffee. I want this to be darker, so I'm going to go in with another layer and let you know how it goes. If you don't want to wait for it to dry overnight, give it about an hour, depending on the size, and then go at it again. So yeah, I'm going to give this another layer and we'll see how it goes. I have now finished with the pig. I did about 4 layers for this. Obviously it's all dry now, as you can see. Yeah, I don't know if the camera's really picking up the colour that well. It's just got a really nice sort of brown antiqued patina, I guess you could say. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it's come out. And you can kind of see like around the plates here, the plate lines, this is like a little bit of splodginess or where the coffee's stained darker there, and you can do things to fix that while the coffee is still wet. I think a lot of people use like a paper towel and they just scrub over it to neaten it up a bit. I kind of like how that looks, so I decided to keep it that way. Yeah, but that's my piggy. So the next method I'm going to show you is another version of the painting the coffee or tea onto the bone. So the bone that I've picked for this is sheep pelvis. As you can see, it's actually kind of a little bit porous and weathered, not too much, but more porous or weathered that the bone is, the more that the bone is going to accept the coffee or tea, and the more quickly it's going to stain and the better it's going to stain. In some cases, if you leave the coffee or tea on the bone or the bone in the coffee and tea for long enough, it can actually turn a very, very dark brown. So in some cases it can become really dark, like this one here, which is a piece of a sacrum from a sheep. It's the very end bit. And I think I left this in the coffee for, I want to say like maybe an hour or two. As you can see, it's really dark, so I'm not really going to have any issues with that fading or anything because it is very dark, and I've actually gotten bones darker with that. Since we're painting it on with this, a more porous bone is usually easier because you don't have to do as many layers and it just soaks in better. So I got a few paintbrushes here and I'm going to choose one that I can do some cool details with. So this is the paintbrush I'm going to use, and I'm simply going to dip this into the coffee and just paint patterns, whatever I like on it. So I am back and I'm done with all of the layers of coffee and it's all dry. I think I did kind of between 4 and 8 layers for this, and yeah, so this is how it looks now. And then I also did just 1 layer for the back. So I just wanted it to be kind of subtle, so I just went for the 1 layer and I like it. That's an example of how you can do the patterning. This method that I'm about to show you is by far the absolute easiest. So all you got to do with these is just plop them straight into the water or coffee and check on them, say every 5 or 10 minutes until you see the colour that you like. So these are just in 2 separate piles because one pile is going to be for tea and the other is going to be for coffee. If you can't tell already, I prefer staining with coffee just because I prefer the colour that it gives. For this dipping method, I have my coffee here and my tea here. I actually ended up changing the tea bags. I just wanted this to be more realistic of how it would be if you use black tea, so I found 2 black tea bags, but in case that wasn't enough, I also included some blackcurrant and blueberry tea just to make sure the colour is strong enough because I couldn't find any more black tea. So these are both very strong, as you know. Firstly, I have this little handful of bones, but this will be going into the tea, so I'm just going to plop them straight in. So I'm going to let them sit for about 10 minutes, I guess, and then I'll check on them again and see how they go. And this goes for these bones, which I'm going to be putting in the coffee. So we will come back and see how they are. So I think it's been about 10 minutes, it may have been a little less, and I'm going to check up on the bones. For this I use tweezers because I really don't want to get coffee and tea all over my hands, and it's also quite hot still. Alright, there's 1 bone from the tea. That's looking kind of nice. This is kind of a good example of why sometimes you might want to use like a little bowl or a shallow container instead of using mugs, because it is hard to retrieve the bones again afterwards. Here's 2 more. I think the blueberry and blackcurrant tea is actually having a little bit of an effect on these, which is pretty cool. There's more in that one. I think I'll leave these ones out for now and I'll let the other ones sit in there for a bit longer so we can see kind of the difference. I'll have a look in here somewhere for the coffee ones. Oh yeah, there we go. So there's one done with the coffee. So I don't know if you can see that because it's so tiny, but there is a little bird vertebrae and that looks quite dark in comparison to this one, as you can see, because this one's more porous so it works faster. Here's a bird bone again, that's looking quite dark. So I've got these ones out. I think I will leave the rest that are in there for a while and see how they go. In some circumstances I even leave the bones in overnight just to see how they turn out, or if they're being particularly difficult I just leave them in the entire night and check on them again. I only do that if like experimenting and you don't care how they come out looking, or you know that you want it to be like really dark. I'm going to leave these for another few minutes. Everything about this is really estimate. I don't really time anything, I just check up on things whenever it comes to mind, so sorry that I can't be more technical with that. I've finished coffee and tea staining these little bones, and they're all in a jar because they're all dry now and they're all mixed together, but I will show them to you. So I'm just kind of doing this from memory, and I think these are the ones that were coffee stained, but I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Actually, I think this one might have been coffee stained. Oh my god, I can't remember. This is so bad. There's an idea of what they look like now that they're dry. So they do lighten up quite a bit depending on the porousness and everything, but other ones have stayed just as dark. Like this little bird vertebrae is still pretty dark, I think. They're the coffee ones. I think one of these went into tea. I think it was that one, but yeah, ones that I am pretty sure are tea. And the camera isn't really showing the colour that well because the lighting isn't great. So that's kind of them all together. So I'm not sure if you can tell on the camera, but in real life you can kind of see a distinct difference between most of the coffee and tea stained bones. So that's pretty cool, and I'm probably going to end up using most of these for jewellery and stuff. Yeah, but I'm pretty happy with how those turned out. So that's mostly tea and that's mostly coffee. Again, not entirely sure, it's been a little while since I've looked at these, so that's why I'm a bit mixed up. the next method, I have this lonely bone here. This is another sheep bone. This is going to be kind of like another version of when I paint the patterns onto the bone, but it's going to be more controlled. So for this, really the main thing you can do is kind of stripes. So I'm going to show you what I mean with some pieces that I've already done this with. This is some more jewellery that I did a while ago. So the effect that we're going to be going for is like this. So as you can see, these bones, these are possum bones, and they have very distinct lines on them. This was done with coffee, but with this method you can get much straighter lines that are very precise. So what I do to do this is I get some cotton or even polyester thread, anything. It can be fairly cheap as long as it holds the moisture. So I'm going to get a bunch of this. So I get the bone. Let's say I want to have a line in the middle. You can really have as many lines as you want, but you don't want them too close together or it can get messy. So as you can see, I've just tied a knot there to secure it. I did 2 or 3 knots, and now what I'm going to do is I'm keeping this bit for now, and I'm just going to wrap this. So I just want to wrap so it's the same thickness as the line that I want the coffee to be, if that makes any sense. So, and you want to make sure that all the cotton is like kind of wrapped closely together. You don't want any spaces because then it won't work as well. I think I'm about happy with that. So I'm just going to cut that about there. Then I just tie these together, and it's good to try and keep this as tight as possible. I'm going to tie these 2 up so this is all secure. Sorry if you can't see properly because of my hands. It's a bit tricky. One important thing to remember when you're doing this is once you've tied everything off and it's all how you want it and everything, don't forget to cut the loose threads here. You don't have to all the way back, but just as much as possible, so that if this kind of trails off to the rest of the bone and touches it like this, the coffee doesn't go with it and make your lines messy, basically. So if you can see this, there is the thread that I've wrapped around it, and there's the little knot. So see, even like leaving this much, I still think I should cut that down a little bit more just so it doesn't get onto the bone like this and make the lines messy. But I'm just going to add a few more of these and then I will come back. Oh, something else that I should mention is with the cotton or thread that you're using, it's usually best to use a really light colour like white or even cream, just because then when you go to put the coffee on the string, which is what we're going to do, you can make sure that the coffee has absorbed into it properly. It's just best to have a light colour because it's a better indicator of how the staining process is going. So I have finished wrapping the bone with the cotton in all the places that I want the stain to be. Something that some people do if you want to be really fancy, once you've wrapped this, on the outside of the lines where they are, hang on, like here and here, some people put things like clear nail polish or clear varnish so that when they do put the coffee or the tea onto this bit, it doesn't leak at all onto the rest of the bone. That makes the lines cleaner, and then after they've finished staining it, they remove the clear nail varnish or whatever they've used with acetone, and it just makes the lines a lot cleaner and neater. I've never done that before because I am lazy and not that fancy, so I just make sure that I'm extra careful when I am painting the coffee on. Now that we have our bone all wrapped up in the cotton, what we're going to do is we're going to pick a kind of fine paintbrush. So I have a few here. Probably going to be using these. So all I do is I dip it in, get some coffee on, and then I really carefully apply it only onto the string. And this takes a shit ton of layers, but it does make a cool effect. And as you can see, it's already getting a bit messy, because even when you do stick to the string, sometimes the coffee still strays to the outside. That is what the clear nail polish is for, so that that doesn't happen, but I don't really mind. I know that I'm taking that risk when I just slap the string on and go for it, you know, so. Also, whilst you do want to get a lot of coffee on this string, you also don't want to overload it with coffee like all at once, because if you do, then it can sometimes end up doing things like that. I just finished painting the 3 lots of cotton. As you can see, this end is already starting to dry, which is indicated by the lighter colour of the cotton compared to over here where I just painted it. So I would say that's nearly ready for another layer already. When you're doing this method, you don't have to wait quite as long before going in for the next layer as you do with just if you're painting it straight on. So usually I kind of just keep on going for a while. So I just did 2 layers on each of those. They're going to need a lot more, but I'm actually just going to let them dry for a bit so I don't overload it with the coffee and make the lines more messy. I'm thinking that the reason this end has gone all messy and stuff is because of the porousness of this end of the bone, because this end, which is in better condition and less porous, it doesn't really seem to be having much of a problem at all. I'll come back when this is dried more and when we can add more layers of coffee. So I'm back with this sheet bone, and I've finished doing all of the layers of coffee onto the string, and it's now dried, as you can see, because the string has gone kind of a light colour again, which indicates that it's dry, and obviously it doesn't feel damp or anything. So the next step that we're going to do is we're just going to cut off these bits of string to reveal the stripes and to see how it went. I have cut all of the string off of the bone, and now you can have a little close up to see how it looks. So obviously at this end it's very messy, where it was more porous and the coffee leaked past the string. But if you look over this side where it's less porous and it's like better condition, it's much more neat. And it only strayed a little bit outside, but even so it kind of did it more neatly than here, if that makes sense. And you can see kind of like these distinct lines where the string was, so I think that's really cool. I quite like that, and I think that's a good example of how it can go wrong and how it can go kind of right. So sorry about this end, by the way, it's just crumbly and awful and there's dirt falling out of it all the time, so I'm going to need to glaze this and stuff. But yeah, so that's the finished product of that one. So excuse the stuff kind of around here, that's just all part of my desk studio area. So here are all of the finished pieces together, so you can kind of get an idea of all the different techniques and stuff that you can use for the different effect that you want, and you can just see it all in one place. We have the painted pig skull here, we have the coffee soaked string method here, we have the dunking method, and then of course the method of painting patterns onto the bone, which is kind of similar to the pig skull. So that's them all together, all finished and happy. So that was my tutorial on how to coffee and tea stain bones. I hope you found it useful and helpful, and that you enjoy your now lovely stained bones. If you have any more tutorials in mind that you'd like me to do, just let me know in the comments and I can do that. So thank you for watching and I will see you next time.